The certified letter from the Riverside Meadows Homeowners Association arrived on a Tuesday morning, and I knew immediately it was going to ruin my entire week. I stood in my driveway in Asheville, North Carolina, holding the thick envelope with trembling hands. My name, Marcus Vaughn, was printed in bold letters across the front, and the return address bore the HOA logo that had become synonymous with my daily stress over the past 3 years. I ripped it open, my coffee growing cold in my other hand. Notice of zoning violation and immediate compliance required, read the header in threatening red letters. My eyes scanned the document quickly, my pulse quickening with each word. They were targeting my treehouse. The treehouse that renowned architect Sandra Chen had personally designed for my property. The treehouse that was going to be featured in Architectural Digest next month. The treehouse that had taken 6 months to build and cost me nearly $80,000. I read the letter again, slower this time, trying to make sense of the absurdity. According to the document, my treehouse violated Section 8.4.2 of the HOA covenants, which stated that no structure exceeding 12 feet in height may be constructed in any backyard without prior written approval from the HOA board. It also cited Section 12.1, which prohibited commercial activity on residential property, claiming that by agreeing to the magazine feature, I was conducting commercial business. The letter was signed by Patricia Holbrook, the HOA president who had made it her personal mission to make my life miserable since I had moved into the neighborhood. I crumpled the paper in my fist, then immediately smoothed it out again. I would need this for my lawyer. My phone was already in my hand, dialing Sandra Chen's office in San Francisco. She answered on the third ring, her voice bright and professional. "Marcus, I was just reviewing the final photos for the Architectural Digest spread. They are absolutely stunning. Your treehouse is going to make waves in the architecture community." "Sandra, we have a problem," I said, walking back into my house and heading straight for my home office. "The HOA just sent me a violation notice. They want the treehouse torn down." There was a long pause on the other end. "You are joking." I wish I was. I sat down at my desk and opened my laptop, pulling up the HOA covenants I had reviewed countless times before. They are claiming it violates height restrictions and that the magazine feature constitutes commercial activity. Sandra's voice shifted from disbelief to anger. "Marcus, we went over this before we even started the design. I personally reviewed your HOA covenants. The treehouse is 14 feet at its highest point, yes, but it is built around and into a mature oak tree. The structure itself doesn't exceed 12 feet from the ground. The tree does. That is a completely different thing." "Try telling that to Patricia Holbrook," I muttered, scrolling through the digital copy of the covenants, "and the commercial activity claim is even more ridiculous. I am not running a business. A magazine is taking pictures." "This is absolutely insane," Sandra said. I could hear her typing rapidly on her end. "Listen, I am sending you every piece of documentation we prepared before construction. The engineering reports, the architectural plans, the legal interpretation of the HOA covenants that my lawyer reviewed. And Marcus, I am not letting them tear down my design. This is one of the most important projects of my career." After hanging up with Sandra, I called my lawyer, James Mitchell, who had handled my home purchase 3 years ago. He listened patiently as I explained the situation, occasionally interrupting to ask for specific details. "The hearing is scheduled for next Thursday?" he asked, referring to the date mentioned in the violation letter. "Yes, 7 p.m. at the community center. It says I have to appear or they will proceed with enforcement action, which apparently includes daily fines of $500 until the structure is removed. James let out a low whistle. That is aggressive, even for an HOA. Email me everything you have. The violation notice, the architectural plans, your communications with Sandra Chen, everything. I will start building our case. The rest of the day passed in a blur of emails and phone calls. Sandra sent me a massive file containing every document related to the Treehouse project. I forwarded it all to James, along with my own detailed timeline of the construction process. That evening, I walked out to my backyard to look at the treehouse that had caused such controversy. It really was a masterpiece. Sandra had designed it to work in harmony with the massive oak tree that had drawn me to this property in the first place. The structure wrapped around the trunk, with large windows that provided views of the surrounding woods. Inside, there was a small study, a reading nook, and a tiny balcony that overlooked my property and the greenway beyond. The treehouse had been Sandra's answer to a challenge I had posed. Could she design a backyard structure that functioned as a home office and retreat without feeling disconnected from nature? She had spent weeks on the initial concepts alone, visiting my property multiple times to study the tree, the light, the way the wind moved through the branches. My phone buzzed with a text from my neighbor, Greg Hoffman. "Dude, did you get a violation letter too? Patricia is on a rampage. She hit 3 houses on our street today." I called him immediately. "What did they get you for?" "My solar panels," Greg said, and I could hear the frustration in his voice. "Apparently they are not the right shade of black. I installed them 6 months ago and suddenly they are a problem." "This is insane," I said. "What are we supposed to do?" "I am fighting it," Greg said firmly. "My wife is on the phone with our lawyer right now. Hey, are you going to the hearing next week?" "I have to. They are threatening daily fines." "We should coordinate," Greg suggested. "If multiple homeowners are being targeted, maybe we can present a unified front." That night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about the treehouse, about the work that had gone into it, about the magazine feature that was supposed to launch in just a few weeks. Architectural Digest had been thrilled with the project. Their photographer had spent an entire day capturing the treehouse from every angle, and their writer had interviewed both Sandra and me about the design philosophy and construction process. The next morning, I received an email from Sandra with the subject line, "Fighting Back." She had written a detailed legal memorandum explaining why the treehouse did not violate any HOA covenants. Her lawyer had reviewed North Carolina property law and found several precedents that supported our position. "The key argument," her email explained, "is that your HOA covenant restricts structures, not natural features. The oak tree is a natural feature. Our treehouse is built to accommodate the tree, not replace it. The highest point of the actual structure is 11 feet, 9 inches from the ground. The tree happens to be 60 feet tall, but that is irrelevant." I forwarded the email to James, who called me within the hour. "This is good," he said. "Really good. Sandra's lawyer did excellent work here, but I want you to be prepared for something." "What?" I asked, not liking his tone. "HOAs don't always care about what is legal or right. They care about control. Patricia Holbrook has a reputation in this area. I have dealt with her before on other cases. She is vindictive and she doesn't like to lose." "So what are you saying?" "I am saying that even if we win this hearing, she might not stop. She might escalate. File additional violations, increase scrutiny on your property, make your life difficult in other ways." "That is harassment," I said. "Yes, it is. And if it comes to that, we can pursue legal action against her personally and against the HOA, but I want you to know what you might be getting into." The week crawled by slowly. I tried to focus on my work as a software developer, but my mind kept drifting to the upcoming hearing. Sandra called me every other day with updates and encouragement. She had even offered to fly out from San Francisco for the hearing, but I told her it wasn't necessary yet. James would represent me, and he was confident in our case. On Wednesday evening, the night before the hearing, I received an unexpected visitor. I was in my kitchen making dinner when the doorbell rang. Through the window, I could see a woman in her mid-50s standing on my porch, her arms crossed, her expression stern. Patricia Holbrook had come to my house. I opened the door but didn't invite her in. "Can I help you?" "Mr. Vaughn," she said, her voice clipped and professional. "I wanted to speak with you before tomorrow's hearing. My lawyer advised me not to discuss the case without him present." "This isn't about the case," Patricia said, though her tone suggested otherwise. "This is about being a good neighbor and following the rules that keep our community beautiful and property values high." "My treehouse doesn't hurt anyone's property values," I said. "If anything, it increases them. It was designed by one of the most respected architects in the country." Patricia's expression hardened. "That is beside the point. You didn't get approval before building it. You went over our heads, and that sets a dangerous precedent. If everyone just built whatever they wanted, this neighborhood would descend into chaos." "I reviewed the covenants," I said, fighting to keep my voice level. "Nothing in them required me to get approval for this structure. Section 8.4.2 clearly states—" "I know what it states," I interrupted, "and my structure doesn't violate it." "You are misinterpreting the covenant, and you are doing it deliberately." Patricia's face flushed red. "I will see you at the hearing tomorrow, Mr. Vaughn. I suggest you prepare yourself for the consequences of your defiance." She turned and walked back to her car, a white BMW with a vanity plate that read HOA Pres. I closed the door and leaned against it, my heart pounding. The hearing room at the Riverside Meadows Community Center was packed. I arrived 15 minutes early with James, and already every seat was filled. I recognized several of my neighbors, including Greg Hoffman and his wife Kelly. There were also faces I didn't know, people who had apparently come just to watch the drama unfold. Patricia sat at a long table at the front of the room, flanked by 4 other board members I vaguely recognized. She was dressed in a severe black pantsuit, her hair pulled back in a tight bun. She looked like she was preparing for war. James and I took seats at a small table facing the board. He had brought 3 large binders filled with documentation, architectural plans, and legal precedents. He arranged them carefully on the table, a show of force. At exactly 7 p.m., Patricia called the meeting to order with a sharp rap of her gavel. "We are here tonight to address a serious violation of our community covenants," she began, looking directly at me. "Mr. Marcus Vaughn has constructed an unauthorized structure on his property that exceeds height limitations and has engaged in commercial activity without board approval." James stood up immediately. "If I may, Madam President, my client disputes both of those characterizations. We are here to present evidence that Mr. Vaughn's treehouse fully complies with all HOA covenants." Patricia's jaw tightened. "You will have your turn to speak, Mr. Mitchell. First, I will present the board's case." For the next 20 minutes, Patricia laid out her argument. She showed photos of my treehouse from various angles, including several that appeared to have been taken with a drone, which seemed like an invasion of privacy, but I kept my mouth shut. She cited Section 8.4.2 repeatedly, insisting that any structure over 12 feet required approval. She also pulled up the Architectural Digest website, where they had posted a teaser about the upcoming feature. "This," she said, pointing to the screen where my treehouse was displayed, is commercial exploitation of residential property. Mr. Vaughn is using his home for business purposes, which violates Section 12.1 of our covenants. When she finally sat down, James stood and approached the board with confidence. "May I present evidence?" he asked. Patricia nodded curtly. James opened his first binder and pulled out a large architectural drawing. "This is the official site plan for Mr. Vaughn's treehouse, prepared by architect Sandra Chen, whose credentials I will establish in a moment. As you can see, the structure itself measures 11 feet, 9 inches at its highest point from the ground level. The oak tree around which the structure is built is approximately 60 feet tall, but the tree is a natural feature of the property, not a structure covered by Section 8.4.2. He passed copies of the site plan to each board member. Patricia studied hers with obvious skepticism. "Furthermore," James continued, "I would like to direct the board's attention to the exact language of Section 8.4.2. He pulled out another document and began reading. "No structure exceeding 12 feet in height may be constructed in any backyard without prior written approval from the HOA board." Note the word structure. According to Black's Law Dictionary, which is the standard for legal interpretation, a structure is defined as that which is built or constructed, an edifice or building of any kind. A tree which existed on this property long before Mr. Vaughn purchased it is not a structure. It is a natural feature. One of the other board members, a man named Robert Chen, leaned forward. "But the treehouse is built into the tree. Doesn't that make the entire thing one structure?" "No," James said firmly. "The treehouse accommodates and works around the tree, but they remain separate entities. If this board's interpretation were correct, then any treehouse built more than 12 feet up in a tree would violate the covenant, even if the structure itself was small. That is an absurd interpretation that would render the covenant meaningless." Patricia interrupted. "What about the commercial activity? You haven't addressed that." James smiled slightly. "I am glad you brought that up. Section 12.1 prohibits running a business from residential property. It specifically mentions retail stores, offices serving clients, and similar commercial ventures. Mr. Vaughn is a software developer who works from home, which is explicitly allowed under modern interpretations of home-based work. Having a photograph of his property appear in a magazine is not a commercial activity. He is not selling anything. He is not advertising a business. He is simply allowing a publication to feature his unique architecture." "He is being paid for the feature," Patricia said sharply. "Actually, he is not," James corrected. "I have the contract right here between Architectural Digest and Mr. Vaughn. There is no payment involved. The magazine requested permission to photograph and feature the treehouse because of its architectural significance. Mr. Vaughn receives no compensation, no advertising benefit, nothing that could be construed as commercial activity." I watched as several board members exchanged glances. Robert Chen looked particularly uncomfortable. James continued his presentation, methodically dismantling each of Patricia's arguments. He showed emails from before construction began, where I had researched the covenants. He presented a letter from Sandra Chen's law firm, offering their legal interpretation of the covenants. He even had a statement from a North Carolina real estate attorney, specializing in HOA law, who confirmed that my treehouse did not violate any covenants. By the time James finished, 45 minutes had passed, and the mood in the room had shifted noticeably. Even some of the people who had come to watch the spectacle seemed to be on my side now. Patricia called for a recess so the board could deliberate. James and I stepped outside, where Greg Hoffman immediately approached us. "That was incredible," Greg said. "Your lawyer destroyed her arguments." "We will see," I said, not wanting to get my hopes up. After 20 minutes, we were called back inside. The board members looked uncomfortable, except for Patricia, whose expression was stony. Robert Chen spoke first. "After reviewing the evidence presented by Mr. Mitchell, I move that we dismiss the violation notice. The structure does not appear to violate Section 8.4.2 as written." Another board member, a woman named Susan Park, nodded. "I second that motion." Patricia's face went through several shades of red. "Are you serious? We can't just let people build whatever they want without oversight. This sets a terrible precedent." "Patricia, the man followed the rules," Robert said, his voice firm. "We can't punish him for building something we personally don't like if it doesn't actually violate the covenants." "I call for a vote," Patricia said through gritted teeth. The vote was 4-1 in my favor, with only Patricia voting to uphold the violation. I felt a wave of relief wash over me, so intense I thought I might collapse. James shook my hand. "Congratulations. The violation is dismissed." We left the community center to applause from several neighbors who had attended. Greg clapped me on the back and his wife Kelly gave me a hug. It felt like a victory, complete and total. But as I walked to my car, I caught Patricia's eye through the window of the community center. She was staring at me with an expression of pure hatred, and I remembered what James had warned me about. She doesn't like to lose. I should have trusted that instinct. The first new violation notice arrived 3 days later. This time, Patricia claimed that my front lawn grass exceeded the maximum allowed height of 3 inches. I measured it immediately. It was 2.5 inches. I sent photos and measurements to James, who fired off a letter to the HOA board calling the violation baseless and retaliatory. The violation was quietly dropped. 2 days after that, I received another notice. My mailbox was supposedly the wrong color. I checked the covenants. There was no restriction on mailbox colors. Another letter from James, another quiet dismissal. Then came notices about my garbage cans being visible from the street. They weren't. About my porch light being too bright. It was a standard 60-watt bulb. About my car being parked on the street overnight, which was explicitly allowed in the covenants. Patricia was waging a war of attrition, and it was working. Each violation, even though they were all dismissed, required time, stress, and legal fees. James was good, but he wasn't free. After the 6th frivolous violation in 2 weeks, I called a meeting with James at his office in downtown Asheville. "This has to stop," I said, dropping the latest violation notice on his desk. "She is harassing me." "I know," James said, and he looked genuinely concerned. "I have been documenting everything. We have enough now to file a harassment claim against both Patricia personally and the HOA as an organization." "Will it work in court?" "Absolutely. The pattern is clear. You won your hearing, and immediately she started targeting you with baseless violations. Any judge would see this as retaliation. The question is whether you want to go down that road." "What do you mean?" James leaned back in his chair. "Filing a lawsuit will escalate this situation significantly. It will cost money, time, and emotional energy. It will make you even more of a target for Patricia, at least in the short term, but it might be the only way to make her stop." I thought about it for a long moment. What if we send her a letter first, a cease and desist or whatever? Tell her that if she doesn't stop, we will sue. "We can do that," James said. "But people like Patricia don't usually respond well to threats. She might take it as a challenge. Let's try it anyway. I want to give her one more chance to back down before we go nuclear." James drafted a strongly worded cease and desist letter that same day. It detailed every frivolous violation, explained how they constituted harassment under North Carolina law, and warned that continued retaliation would result in legal action seeking damages and attorney's fees. The letter was sent via certified mail. Patricia signed for it 2 days later. For 48 hours, nothing happened. I started to think that maybe, just maybe, she had gotten the message. Then Architectural Digest published their feature. The article was everything Sandra and I had hoped for. The photography was stunning, capturing the treehouse in morning light, afternoon sun, and evening glow. The writer had done an excellent job explaining Sandra's design philosophy and how the structure worked in harmony with the natural environment. There were quotes from both of us, discussing the challenges and rewards of the project. The article went viral online. Within hours, architecture blogs and design websites were sharing it. Sandra called me, ecstatic. Her firm's website had crashed from all the traffic. She had received inquiries from 3 new potential clients just that morning. I should have been celebrating. Instead, I was filled with dread. The next morning, I woke to find my front yard covered in orange spray paint. Someone had written "illegal structure" in huge letters across my grass. They had also spray painted the same message on my driveway and the sidewalk in front of my house. I immediately called the police. Officer David Martinez arrived within 20 minutes, took photos, and filed a report for vandalism. "Any idea who might have done this?" he asked. I told him about the ongoing conflict with the HOA, about Patricia Holbrook's harassment campaign. He took notes, but said that without evidence, there wasn't much he could do. "I will increase patrols in your neighborhood," he offered. "And if you have security cameras, now would be a good time to install them." I called James as soon as the officer left. "We are filing the lawsuit today." "I will start the paperwork immediately," he said. By noon, security cameras were being installed around my property. I had ordered a comprehensive system with cameras covering every angle of my house, including the backyard where the treehouse stood. The cameras proved their worth that very night. At 2:15 a.m., my phone buzzed with an alert from the security system. Motion detected in the backyard. I pulled up the live feed and felt my blood run cold. Patricia Holbrook was in my backyard, approaching the treehouse with what looked like a can of gasoline. I called 911 immediately while keeping the camera feed rolling. "There is someone on my property with what appears to be gasoline. I think they are going to try to burn down my treehouse." The dispatcher took my information and said officers were en route. I watched the feed as Patricia circled the treehouse, splashing liquid around its base. My heart was pounding. This was insane. This was criminal. But then she made a mistake. She tried to light the gasoline with a lighter, but her hands were shaking. The lighter fell from her grip, and as she bent to pick it up, she looked directly at one of my cameras. Her face was clearly visible, illuminated by the treehouse's security light. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Patricia heard them too. She dropped the gasoline can and ran for the fence at the back of my property, climbing over it with surprising agility for a woman her age. But she didn't know about the camera I had placed facing that fence. Officer Martinez was first on the scene, along with 2 other officers. I met them in my driveway and led them to the backyard. The gasoline can was still there, and the strong smell of fuel filled the air. "You know who did this?" Officer Martinez asked. "I have video," I said, pulling up the footage on my phone. The officers watched in silence as the video showed Patricia Holbrook entering my property, circling the treehouse with gasoline, attempting to light it on fire, and then fleeing when she heard sirens. "That is Patricia Holbrook," one of the other officers said, recognizing her. "She is the HOA president for this neighborhood." "She has been harassing my client for weeks," James said. I had called him as soon as I called the police, and he had arrived just minutes after the officers. We were preparing to file a harassment lawsuit, but this changes everything. Officer Martinez looked at me seriously. "Mr. Vaughn, this is attempted arson. It is a Class F felony in North Carolina. With this video evidence, we will be arresting Miss Holbrook tonight. Are you willing to press charges?" "Absolutely," I said without hesitation. The officers left to get a warrant for Patricia's arrest. James stayed with me, and we sat in my living room, still processing what had just happened. "She tried to burn down your treehouse," James said, shaking his head in disbelief. "I have dealt with vindictive HOA board members before, but this is beyond anything I have ever seen." "What happens now?" I asked. "Now, the criminal justice system takes over. She will be arrested, charged with attempted arson, probably other charges too, criminal trespass, attempted destruction of property. She is looking at serious prison time if convicted. And the HOA will likely try to distance themselves from her. But we can still pursue a civil lawsuit for the harassment. The organization is liable for the actions of its president when she is acting in her official capacity." At 4:30 a.m., my phone rang. It was Officer Martinez. "We have taken Patricia Holbrook into custody." She denied everything at first, but when we showed her the video, she broke down. "She is being charged with attempted arson, criminal trespass, and stalking. Her bail hearing is tomorrow afternoon." I thanked him and hung up. I should have felt relieved, but mostly I just felt exhausted. The story broke in the local news the next morning. "HOA president arrested for attempted arson," read the headline in the Asheville Citizen-Times. The article detailed the ongoing dispute over my treehouse and Patricia's arrest. My phone started ringing off the hook. Neighbors calling to express their support. Sandra calling from San Francisco, shocked and concerned. Even the journalist from Architectural Digest reached out, asking if I wanted to do a follow-up article about the incident. The bail hearing was held that afternoon. James went with me to observe. Patricia appeared before the judge in an orange jumpsuit, her hair disheveled, looking nothing like the put-together woman who had terrorized me for weeks. The prosecutor argued that Patricia was a flight risk and a danger to the community. They presented the video evidence, which the judge watched with an expression of growing disbelief. Patricia's lawyer, a young public defender who looked overwhelmed, argued for reasonable bail. "My client is a respected member of the community with no prior criminal record. She made a terrible mistake, but she is not a danger." The judge was not convinced. "Miss Holbrook, you attempted to burn down a structure on someone's property because of an HOA dispute. That shows an extraordinary level of recklessness and vindictiveness. Bail is set at $50,000. Patricia's face went white. She was led out of the courtroom, and I heard her crying as she was taken back into custody. Over the next few days, the story continued to snowball. More details emerged about Patricia's history with the HOA. Other homeowners came forward with their own stories of harassment and intimidation. Greg Hoffman shared his experience with the solar panel violation. A family 3 streets over talked about how Patricia had tried to force them to cut down a tree because she didn't like the way it looked. The remaining HOA board members held an emergency meeting and voted unanimously to remove Patricia from her position. They also issued a public apology to me and the other homeowners who had been targeted. James filed a civil lawsuit against both Patricia and the HOA, seeking damages for harassment, emotional distress, and the cost of repairing my spray-painted lawn and driveway. The HOA's insurance company reached out within a week, looking to settle. "They want to avoid a trial," James explained during a meeting at his office. "Bad publicity, potential for a large jury verdict, all of that. They are offering $75,000 to settle all claims against the HOA organization. What about Patricia? I asked. She is facing criminal charges. That is separate, but we can also pursue a personal judgment against her if you want. I thought about it. The HOA settlement sounds fair. As for Patricia, I just want to make sure she can't do this to anyone else. The criminal case moved forward. Patricia's lawyer tried to negotiate a plea deal, but the prosecutor was not inclined to be lenient. The video evidence was too damning, and the crime too serious. The trial was scheduled for 6 weeks later. In the meantime, I tried to return to some semblance of normal life. I worked in my treehouse, which had become famous not just for its architecture, but for the dramatic story surrounding it. Sandra's firm received dozens of inquiries from people wanting similar designs. Sandra flew out to visit 2 weeks before the trial. We had dinner at a nice restaurant downtown, and she brought me preliminary sketches for a new project she was working on. "I can't thank you enough for fighting for the treehouse," she said. "I know it hasn't been easy." "It was worth it," I said, meaning it. "Your design is incredible. I use it every single day." And honestly, if Patricia hadn't escalated things the way she did, she might have eventually found some way to force me to take it down. At least now that is settled. Still, attempted arson. That is terrifying. Tell me about it. I am just glad I installed those cameras when I did. The trial lasted 3 days. I was called to testify on the first day. The prosecutor walked me through the entire timeline, from the initial violation notice to the night Patricia tried to burn down my treehouse. The video evidence was played for the jury multiple times. Patricia's defense attorney tried to argue that she had been under extreme stress, that she had not been thinking clearly. He portrayed her as a dedicated community volunteer who had simply snapped under pressure. But the video was too clear, too damning. The jury could see Patricia methodically pouring gasoline around the treehouse, trying to light it on fire. This was not a moment of temporary insanity. This was premeditated destruction. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning a guilty verdict on all counts: attempted arson, criminal trespass, and stalking. At sentencing 2 weeks later, the judge was harsh. "Miss Holbrook, you held a position of trust in your community. Instead of using that position responsibly, you engaged in a campaign of harassment against a homeowner who had done nothing wrong. When legal means of intimidation failed, you resorted to attempting to burn down his property. This kind of vindictive, criminal behavior cannot be tolerated. I sentence you to 6 years in state prison, with the possibility of parole after 3 years." Patricia broke down in tears, but I felt no sympathy for her. She had made her choices, and now she would face the consequences. The remaining HOA board members reached out to me after the sentencing. Robert Chen, who had supported me during the initial hearing, had been elected as the new president. "Marcus, I want to personally apologize for everything you went through," he said. "We were meeting at a coffee shop near the neighborhood. Patricia's behavior was inexcusable, and the board should have stopped her sooner." "I appreciate that," I said. "What changes are you making to prevent this from happening again?" Robert pulled out a folder. "We are completely rewriting the HOA bylaws. More oversight, term limits for board members, a formal appeals process for violations, and strict penalties for board members who abuse their authority. We want to make sure this never happens to anyone else." "That sounds like a good start." "We also want to officially recognize your treehouse as a valuable addition to the neighborhood. We are thinking of updating our architectural guidelines to encourage innovative, environmentally conscious design rather than restricting it." I smiled. "Sandra will be thrilled to hear that." The civil case against the HOA was settled for $75,000, as James had negotiated. The money covered all my legal fees, the cost of the security system, repairs to my property, and still left a substantial amount left over. I donated $10,000 to a local legal aid organization that helped homeowners dealing with HOA disputes. Another $10,000 went to an architecture scholarship fund in Sandra's name. The rest I kept, figuring I had earned it after everything I had been through. Life slowly returned to normal. The Architectural Digest article continued to generate attention, and my treehouse was featured in several follow-up pieces about innovative residential architecture. Sandra's firm was thriving, and she sent me photos of 3 new treehouse projects she was working on, inspired by mine. The new HOA board was true to their word. They implemented sweeping reforms and created a neighborhood committee dedicated to promoting thoughtful, creative design. Several other homeowners started their own renovation projects, knowing they wouldn't face the kind of harassment I had endured. Greg Hoffman finally got his solar panel issue resolved. In fact, the new board actively encouraged renewable energy installations, and within 6 months, a dozen homes in the neighborhood had solar panels. 6 months after Patricia's sentencing, I was working in my treehouse office when I received an unexpected email. It was from Patricia herself, sent from prison. "Mr. Vaughn," it read, "I know that no apology can undo the harm I caused you. I have had a lot of time to think about my actions, and I am deeply ashamed. I let my need for control and my pride turn me into someone I don't recognize. You did nothing wrong. Your treehouse is beautiful and you had every right to build it. I hope someday you can forgive me, though I know I don't deserve it. Patricia Holbrook." I read the email several times. Part of me wanted to delete it and forget about her. But another part recognized that she was at least trying to take accountability for what she had done. I showed the email to James during our next meeting. "That is unusual," he said. "Most people in her position would not reach out to their victim. You think she means it? Maybe." Prison has a way of forcing people to confront their actions. Whether she genuinely understands the harm she caused or just wants to feel better about herself, I can't say. I thought about it for a few days before responding. I kept my reply brief. "Patricia, I acknowledge your apology. I hope you use this time to genuinely reflect and become a better person. I have moved on with my life, and I hope someday you can too. Marcus Vaughn." I never heard from her again, and that was fine with me. A year after the whole ordeal began, Sandra flew out to Asheville again. This time, she brought a film crew. A documentary series about innovative architecture wanted to feature my treehouse, and Sandra had arranged the whole thing. We spent a full day filming, with Sandra explaining her design process and me talking about how I used the space. The treehouse had become more than just an office. It was my retreat, my sanctuary, the place where I went to think and create. "You know," Sandra said during a break in filming, "this project changed my whole approach to residential design. I used to focus so much on aesthetic innovation that I sometimes forgot about the human element. But seeing how much joy this treehouse brings you, how it has become such an integral part of your life, that reminded me why I became an architect in the first place. To deal with vindictive HOA presidents," I joked. She laughed. "To create spaces that enhance people's lives. The fact that we also defeated a crazy HOA president is just a bonus." The documentary aired 6 months later on a streaming platform. It was part of a series called Architecture Against the Odds, featuring buildings that had faced significant challenges during design or construction. My treehouse was the final episode, titled The HOA War. The episode was a hit. It didn't just focus on the architecture but also told the full story of the conflict with Patricia, the harassment, the attempted arson, and the eventual resolution. The filmmakers had interviewed me, Sandra James, Robert Chen, Greg Hoffman, and even Officer Martinez. After it aired, I received hundreds of messages from people who had dealt with their own HOA nightmares. Many thanked me for fighting back and showing that it was possible to win against an abusive HOA. Some shared stories even more bizarre than mine. A few asked for advice or referrals to lawyers who specialized in HOA disputes. I did what I could to help, sharing James's contact information with people in North Carolina and recommending legal resources for those in other states. The attention also brought unexpected opportunities. I was invited to speak at a conference about property rights and HOA reform. A local news station did a follow-up piece about how the neighborhood had changed since Patricia's arrest. Several architecture schools asked if they could bring students to study my treehouse as an example of how to work within and around regulations. 2 years after the initial violation notice, I sat in my treehouse on a beautiful spring morning, drinking coffee and looking out over the woods behind my property. Birds were singing, sunlight filtered through the oak leaves, and everything was peaceful. My laptop was open, but I wasn't working. Instead, I was reading an article about HOA reform legislation being proposed in the North Carolina State Legislature. The bill would impose stricter oversight on HOA boards, require transparency in violation proceedings, and create penalties for board members who abuse their authority. Several legislators had cited my case as an example of why such reforms were needed. I thought about everything that had happened. The stress, the fear, the anger, the legal battles, and the sleepless nights. Patricia's face as she tried to light my treehouse on fire, captured forever on video. But I also thought about the positive outcomes, the HOA reform in my neighborhood, the other homeowners who now felt empowered to improve their properties without fear, the attention Sandra's firm had received, the scholarship fund, the legal aid donations, the documentary inspiring others to stand up against abusive HOAs. And most of all, I thought about the treehouse itself. I looked around at the beautiful space Sandra had created, at the way the morning light played across the wooden beams, at the view of nature that had inspired this whole project. It had been worth it. Every bit of stress, every legal fee, every confrontation. Because in the end, I had won. Not just the legal battle, but something more important. I had refused to be bullied into destroying something beautiful. My phone buzzed with a text from Sandra. Just landed 3 new treehouse projects, all from people who saw the documentary. Thank you for being brave enough to fight for good design. I smiled and texted back. Thank you for designing something worth fighting for. A few weeks later, I received notice that the HOA was officially dissolving. After all the controversy and the legal costs from the lawsuit settlement, too many homeowners had lost faith in the organization. The board had voted to disband, and the neighborhood would no longer have an HOA. Robert Chen called to tell me the news personally. I know it is ironic that the HOA I am president of is ending, but honestly, I think it is for the best. We have proven that we don't need a heavy-handed organization to maintain property values or community standards. People can be trusted to take care of their own properties and be good neighbors without threats and fines. I think you are right, I said. And look at how much better the neighborhood looks now than it did when Patricia was in charge. People are actually investing in their homes, adding thoughtful improvements instead of just following cookie-cutter rules. The dissolution of the HOA required approval from a majority of homeowners, The vote was not even close. 83% voted in favor of ending it. Without the HOA, the neighborhood flourished. Greg added more solar panels and installed a small wind turbine. Another family built a beautiful greenhouse for their organic garden. Someone down the street hired an artist to paint a mural on their garage door. All things that would have been violations under Patricia's regime. But now they were celebrated as expressions of individual creativity that added character to the community. Property values actually increased. Turns out, when people are free to improve their homes in meaningful ways, it benefits everyone. 3 years after Patricia's arrest, I received an unexpected letter. It was from the parole board, informing me that Patricia Holbrook was eligible for parole and asking if I wanted to submit a statement to be considered during her hearing. I discussed it with James over lunch. "You are under no obligation to participate," he said. "But if you have thoughts about whether she should be released, this is your opportunity to share them." I spent several days thinking about it. Part of me wanted to argue against her release, to make her serve every day of her sentence. But another part recognized that she had already served 3 years, that she had shown remorse, and that keeping her in prison longer wouldn't benefit anyone. I submitted a brief statement to the parole board. Patricia Holbrook committed a serious crime against me and my property. Her actions caused significant stress and financial harm. However, she has served her time, and I believe in the possibility of rehabilitation. If the parole board determines that she is no longer a threat to the community, I will not oppose her release. My only request is that she be prohibited from serving on any HOA board or similar organization in the future. 2 months later, I learned that Patricia had been granted parole. She would be released with strict conditions, including regular meetings with a parole officer, community service, and yes, a prohibition on serving in any HOA leadership position. I never saw her again. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she had moved to a different part of North Carolina, far from Asheville. Apparently, she was working at a grocery store and keeping a low profile. That was fine with me. I had moved on with my life, and I hoped she had learned from her mistakes. 4 years after the initial violation notice, Architectural Digest published a follow-up article titled "The Treehouse That Changed Everything." It revisited my property, showing how the treehouse had aged beautifully and remained a functional, beloved part of my home. But the article also explored the broader impact. It discussed Sandra's subsequent treehouse designs, the HOA reforms that had been inspired by my case, and the growing movement toward more flexible, innovative residential architecture. The fight over Marcus Vaughn's treehouse was never really about a single structure, the article concluded. It was about whether communities would embrace innovation and individual expression or cling to rigid, outdated rules. Thanks to Vaughn's willingness to stand his ground and architect Sandra Chen's brilliant design, the conversation around residential architecture and HOA regulations has changed forever. I kept a framed copy of that article in my treehouse office, right next to the original feature. 5 years after everything began, I was contacted by a publisher who wanted me to write a book about my experience. "HOA horror stories are trending," the editor explained. "But your story has something extra. The architecture angle, the criminal case, the documentary, the legislative reform. It is compelling on multiple levels." I thought about it and decided to do it. I spent 6 months writing, working mostly from my treehouse, naturally. Sandra contributed a chapter about the design process. James wrote about the legal aspects. Even Officer Martinez provided a brief statement about the importance of documenting evidence in harassment cases. The book, Designed to Fight: How a Treehouse Took Down a Tyrannical HOA, was published the following year. It sold modestly, but struck a chord with anyone who had ever dealt with an abusive HOA or felt stifled by ridiculous rules. The book tour took me to cities across the country. At every stop, people lined up to share their own HOA nightmares. I heard stories about people being fined for having the wrong color curtains, for parking their own cars in their own driveways, for planting flowers that were not on an approved list. But I also heard success stories. People who had fought back against unreasonable rules and won. Communities that had reformed their HOAs or dissolved them entirely, just like mine had. Legislation in multiple states providing better protections for homeowners. Change was happening, slowly but surely. Today, 7 years after Patricia Holbrook sent me that first violation notice, I am sitting in my treehouse on a quiet afternoon. The structure has weathered beautifully, the wood taking on a rich patina that Sandra says will only improve with age. I have long since paid off all the legal bills. The settlement money is gone, donated to causes I believe in. But the treehouse remains, a permanent testament to the importance of fighting for what matters. I use it every day. Some mornings I work here, developing software in one of the most beautiful offices imaginable. Some evenings I just sit on the small balcony, watching the sunset through the trees. Sometimes friends visit and we have coffee in the reading nook, surrounded by windows and nature. The treehouse is more than a structure. It is a symbol of standing up to bullies, of supporting good design, of refusing to let fear and vindictiveness win. Sandra still uses photos of the treehouse in her presentations. It remains one of her signature projects, the one that put her firm on the international map. She has since designed tree houses in 7 different states, each one unique, each one a work of art. The documentary continues to find new audiences on streaming platforms. Every few months, I get a message from someone who just watched it and felt inspired by the story. The legislation I testified for passed in North Carolina 2 years ago. It is not perfect, but it provides real protections for homeowners and creates accountability for HOA boards. Other states are considering similar laws, and my neighborhood, it is thriving. Without the heavy hand of an oppressive HOA, people have turned it into a showcase of diverse, thoughtful architecture and landscaping. Property values have continued to rise. People take pride in their homes because they have the freedom to make them truly their own. Sometimes, I think about what would have happened if I had just given up when I received that first violation notice. If I had dismantled the treehouse rather than fight. I would have lost something precious, something that has brought me joy every single day for 7 years. But more than that, Patricia would have continued her reign of terror. Other homeowners would have continued to suffer under her vindictive leadership. The reforms would never have happened. The documentary would never have been made. The legislation would never have been proposed. One person standing up to injustice really can make a difference. As the sun sets and the treehouse fills with warm, golden light, I think about how grateful I am. Grateful for Sandra's vision and talent. Grateful for James's legal expertise. Grateful for the neighbors who supported me. Grateful for the security cameras that caught Patricia in the act. Grateful for a justice system that, imperfect as it is, ultimately held a criminal accountable. But mostly, I am grateful for this treehouse. This beautiful, controversial, magazine-worthy treehouse that started as a dream and became a battle cry. I hear my phone buzz with a notification. It is an email from a homeowner in Texas who read my book and wants advice about fighting their own HOA over a similar issue. I smile and start typing a response. The fight continues in neighborhoods across America. But at least now, people know it is possible to win. They know that HOAs are not all powerful, that unreasonable rules can be challenged, that bullies can be stopped. And they know about a treehouse in Asheville, North Carolina, that refused to come down.